I'm John Batchelor. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com continues with me. WikiLeaks. Right now, there are WikiLeaks cables, all of them, dumped on the world without redaction. And we have to deal with the evidence that we have in front of us. And we're joined now, and we welcome Stephen Yates. He is in Taipei. That's the capital of the free, capitalist, democratic country of Taiwan. And Stephen is here to comment on WikiLeaks about China. In particular, Stephen's worked for the Bush administration. He was Dick Cheney's China advisor. Stephen, a very good morning to you. There are a number of cables here. I am immediately gripped by the one that addresses the Uyghurs, and especially the revelations by our State Department, very well written, very well presented, that the violence that we saw in Xinjiang, this is a region that was conquered by the Maoists in the late 1940s, as a region that is exploited by the Maoists for their energy needs and also to resettle what they regard as the Han Chinese colonists. This area now is the center of a lot of violence and turmoil. But I read in this WikiLeaks, Stephen, that both sides, the Uyghurs and the Hans, and especially in Urumqi, the capital, blame the party secretary. Did we know this? Was this in the news before we saw this? Good morning to you, Stephen.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Well, I don't think it's been very much in the news. This is a remote part of the world. A remote part of China doesn't get top-tier coverage in many ways, but it's an immensely consequential development. Yes, many people in our government are aware that there are these criticisms and pressures, and I think to an expanding degree, people in this part of the world are aware that the Communist Party's hold on control and power is more tenuous. It's obvious that people oppressed are getting frustrated and organizing and pushing back, but an increasing number of Han Chinese are aware of the dysfunction in the communist approach to trying to control free enterprise and free expression of religion.
Stephen, the WikiLeaks cables on China really cover the spectrum of relations between Beijing and Washington. I mean, it's not just the Uyghurs, it's Google, it's air quality in Beijing, it's proliferation of missiles to Iran. Isn't this going to change the way that Washington and Beijing work with each other now that everyone has gotten a chance to see what's going on? And is this a good thing or is this a bad thing?
Well, in general, I consider WikiLeaks to be a bad thing, given that I've dedicated most of my life to trying to keep classified information classified. But once it is out, I think that this window into some degree of the truth that has been known within the government, but we just have happy talk speeches by politicians about our relations with China, I think potentially can break us free of what I consider to be the Nixon-Kissinger stranglehold of imposing a private Mandarin style of diplomacy where high-level officials carry out secret meetings and claim cooperation. This reveals a much more realistic, much more tense, much less productive relationship in some ways with the government of China.
Amen. I think that it really is so important that we see that really the ideology that Washington has had with China has just been a sort of an unbreakable assumption that we can work with the Chinese on all sorts of things. And then what we get to see is a very different approach that Washington has had privately. And this approach that Washington has had privately is sort of very different from the way that Americans in general would conduct relations with a big authoritarian state. So I think that this is sort of very good in the sense that we may see a more realistic, a more honest, a more candid China policy.
Stephen, I hope that's the way the public will see that, and we should be pressuring candidates and others who may seek power to take this lesson. It will take a lot of reinforcement. Breaking these bad habits of 4 decades is going to take quite a bit.
I want to press this Uyghur matter because it is so easy to compare what these cables tell us about the violence directed against the Uyghur and Han people by the party to what's going on in Syria. Worldwide protest because the Assad regime in Damascus has ordered the army and the military to open fire on civilians, unarmed civilians, funeral processions. Stephen, I read the same thing here, that the violence again and again, September 3rd, July, indiscriminate violence, opening fire against Uyghur civilians, Uyghurs with automatic weapons, Uyghurs detained anytime, anywhere, without recourse to trial. This is Syria writ large in Urumqi, and this is the evidence, and the State Department has this evidence.
Well, I mean, that it's sad and tragic and true all at the same time, and it's one of the reasons it sort of gave lie to President Obama's rationale for his approach to the Arab Spring. If you're going to have a military-led intervention or assistance to the people of Libya to keep them from facing mass slaughter, certainly China, as Gordon has chronicled many times, has killed many more Chinese people. I mean, really one of the great crimes against humanity is taking a great civilization, imposing a flawed European ideology, and diminishing the value of the human soul along the way. And so today, in China, far too many people cheapen the value of the loss of life. And so they see whether it's mass casualties in a mining accident or the government actually taking violence against their people, and they just sit back and focus on economic benefit or let's lie low and don't let the trouble come to our door. I believe that this is changing. I believe that there is sentiment building that's going to prove that this regime is more fragile. And I think that these revelations hopefully are a dose of truth for people in China, but even more so for the people who have bought the fantasy of what China they thought they were dealing with for the last decade.
A detail here, just quickly, Stephen. Why does the State Department not let us see this right away? Why do we have to wait till it's purloined and displayed and put people at risk for us to see the facts that the State Department has about how Beijing makes war on its own people?
Well, to me, there is no excuse for that. But I think that there is a completely broken apparatus in American government and policymaking of engaging in legitimate political warfare against hostile regimes. And you can call it soft power if that makes it go down easier. But they find a way to leak classified intelligence about Iran negotiations if they want to get in the way of what a Bush administration is trying to do in those negotiations. But they will not disclose, by whatever means, the bad acts of this kind of a government. To me, there is no excuse for this information not getting out. The control over media access in China is something that I frankly think more journalists should be complaining about. But really, in short, to your question, there is no excuse for this to be held.
Well, I'm glad we have it, and I'm glad we have the facts, Gordon, that we know now the State Department knows what we've been talking about.
The John Batchelor Show is on the case.
Look, this says the Uyghurs are murdered by order of the party secretary in Urumqi.
Yes, and you know, this is something that's going to continue until we demand that it stop.
Stephen, 30 seconds. These WikiLeaks, shall we continue to press them? Do you agree now that we have them, we must press them?
We must press China on these kinds of issues for sure. I have to say I still am mortally opposed to the way these things came about. But once the information is out, we have to take the facts as we see them. These documents are real. The issues are real. And now the government has no choice, I think, but to have to deal with them more publicly.
Stephen Yates, who was an advisor to the vice president of the Bush administration, speaking on the WikiLeaks documents about especially Urumqi and the violence against the Uyghurs by the Chinese government. Gordon Chang, I'm John Batchelor.